Hello. Before I get started, I'd like to thank SkeptiCamp. It's been a wonderful experience. It's the first one I've gone to. And I want to comment on the skeptical community that I've met and heard from. It's been very heartening to me. I will contrast this with a couple months ago. I was in church by accident, and I'm a pretty old guy, and I felt like a youngster there. I don't think there was anybody under 70. Really. I mean, that's an old community. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but it's I think it's a dying community. Anyway, I want to talk about my history with skepticism. Now, why do I want to talk about that? Because I heard several luminaries in the skeptical world, such as Michael Shermer, talking about how he used to be a born-again Christian, and then he moved to this, and then he got into bicycle racing, and then he became a skeptic. But there was a logical progression. And I have a progression that I went through from my childhood to my professional career at NASA, and then other things that happened to me after that. And let me find the page down. There we go. Let me give you a quick resume. I graduated from Georgia Tech in 1957 with a degree in aeronautical engineering. I should mention I was born and raised in upstate New York. My father was an immigrant from Sicily. He came to this country at age 4 with his mother, father, and younger sister. My mother was born in Pennsylvania to an Italian, from an immigrant family from Naples. So I'm pretty much 100% Italian, although some Sicilians I talk to don't consider themselves Italians. Early on, about age 4 or 5, I found a fountain pen discarded in a trash barrel. And I was showing it to my friends, and one of them said, "Would you trade for that?" And I said, "Well, what do you got to trade?" "A rabbit's foot." Well, I didn't know what a rabbit's foot was. He said, "You get anything you wish for with the rabbit's foot." So with that rabbit's foot clenched tightly in my hand, I went to my dad, and I saw he was counting out some change. I think it was at a store. He was getting change in return. And I saw a shiny dime. I said, "Dad, can I have that dime?" And he said, "Okay." And it was like, I mean, with a dime in 1938 maybe, you could go to the candy store and you'd get a ton of candy for that. So I thought, man, with this rabbit's foot, I mean, the world is my oyster, right? Well, later on, my mom and dad were doing my father was a doctor, a physician. Of course, everybody paid the doctor. Those who paid the doctor paid him in cash. You know, nobody had checks or credit cards in those days. And he was counting out some money, I think, to give to my mom for groceries. And I saw a dollar bill, and I thought, oh my God, what can I do with a dollar bill? And I said, "Dad, can I have a dollar bill?" He looked at me like I was crazy. He said, "Of course not. I'm not going to give a 4-year-old dollar bill." That you know, I was absolutely crushed. That blasted rabbit's foot did not work. Moving ahead, my brother and I had to go to church every Sunday morning. Now, it was curious because I'd be sitting in Sunday school, and then they take us into the church. And I thought, how come Ron and I are going to church, and my mom, dad, and sister are home? You know, what gets them up? And then, you know, it was like, somehow this is part of our training, but why should we sit through this stuff? I never became religious as a child. Now, I'll have something to say about atheism, but I did, you know, they did indoctrinate us in the 10 Commandments, and you didn't want to kill anybody or you'd go to hell. You didn't want to take the Lord's name in vain or you'd go to hell. But that's what I thought as a kid. And here I was playing baseball one day. I was probably about 10, 9, 10. And I got hit by a line drive right in the kneecap. And I'll tell you, if you ever been hit by a baseball in the kneecap, that can bring you down fast. And I said, God damn it. And I thought, I didn't know what hurt worse. The fact that I knew I was going to go to hell, or that I knew that my knee hurt like hell. And then when I didn't go to hell and lightning didn't strike me or anything, I thought, what is this all about? Well, let me ask a question. The religion in this country was going downhill. Religious participation was going downhill fast until early in the 70s, a movie came out that shot up church attendance. Does anybody know what that movie is?
The Exorcist.
The Exorcist. I went, you could almost look at the chart, because this is when The Exorcist was released, and I remember long lines getting into the movie theater. I didn't know what it was about. I went, and to me, it was the most hysterical comedy I ever saw. I mean, I was laughing my ass off. In fact, after the movie was over, I was leaving, talking to friends and everything, and this woman came up to me. I'll tell you, if she had been a man, I would have ducked. She was so furious. She said, you laughed the whole time. She said, I bet you don't believe in the devil. I said, no, I don't. I think it's funny. So anyway, backtracking, when I was in 1947, a guy named Kenneth Arnold reported that he saw flying saucers. He didn't really report that he saw flying saucers. He said he reported that he saw some kind of aircraft that were boomerang shaped, and they skipped, the flight of these 9 objects were skipping across the sky like speedboats cutting across wakes of boats, or saucers skipped along a lake. A Cub reporter trying to make the news reporting deadline said he reported flying saucers. Well, originally Kenneth Arnold didn't say flying saucers, but anyway, that captured the imagination of everyone. My father and I were no exception. We would wait every month for True magazine to come out. It always would have flying saucer stories. And we ate them up until I read this one article that I almost thought, something's questionable here. The article said that they had recovered a flying saucer. It was a craft of this many, was 43 feet thick, exactly. It was 78 feet exactly. It was, the antennas were exactly 3 feet. And I thought to myself, wait a minute. I learned in school that all this measurement system, foot and yards and inches and feet, were all based on how long the king's foot was in merry old England, how long he could measure out a yard of material. That doesn't make sense. Why would people, and this was used, these measurements was used as this was man-made from another planet or another being from outer space. And I thought, that just blew up my whole idea of flying saucers. It couldn't be. I mean, it was either a hoax or it's man-made in the U.S. or the Soviet Union. So I became rather skeptical about flying saucers. Another bit of skepticism, I look back at the milestones of my life, the flying saucers, the rabbit's foot. I entered high school. I should mention that I grew up in an upper middle class neighborhood with school system. And my brother and I were the only Italian American kids there. We had 2 Jewish American kids, or Jewish heritage kids there. And the rest of them were all I wouldn't say WASP because there were a lot of Catholics there too, but they were all not what you'd call diversified. Anyway, I went from there to a high school that had other schools feeding it, met different people, and there was in the homeroom, last name Cassetti, I sat next to a guy named Chuck Cassidy, and he was really mean to me. I mean, it's like I was his enemy, and I hadn't done anything to him. So finally, one time, we'd gotten to an altercation, and you know, what's your problem? He says, your problem is your dad. And I said, my dad? He says, yeah, he is the most hated doctor in town. What are you kidding? Boy, where did you come up with that idea? Well, Chuck came from a lower middle class neighborhood, and my father used to have patients in his neighborhood. And so they were aware of him. But Dr. Cassetti was the only Italian doctor that wasn't a Roman Catholic. So he was hated because of his religion, or his non-religion, whatever. It was, you know, and I could never figure that out till I really understood the whole religious business. Anyway, I mentioned I graduated from Georgia Tech in '57. A few weeks later, I ended up working for the federal government at a premier aeronautical research facility, actually agency, NACA, in Hampton, Virginia. And this was in June of 1957. And in October, just a few months later, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1. And NACA became NASA, and I got involved in the space end of it, from aeronautical research to space. And I was off on the greatest adventure of my life, because I ended up helping get astronauts into space, and then astronauts on the moon, and eventually into the shuttle. On one of the programs, we had the Mercury program, putting astronauts into low Earth orbit. We were trying to beat the Russians, but they put a man up first, Yuri Gagarin. Gemini was a follow-on to Mercury. It flew 2 astronauts. But the interesting thing was, we didn't have mission control in Houston at the time. We had all transferred to Houston, the new Space Center, but we hadn't completed the Mission Control Center in Houston. So we would go to the Cape, that would be the control center there. I had a job that was responsible for the launch part of it. And on the very first Gemini flight, Gemini 1, we launched it, we got up into Earth orbit, and we tried to prove to the world that we were much more open than the Soviet Union. We would basically allow the news media to have direct access to our voice links. They knew everything that was going on, as opposed to the Soviet Union, who only announced Gagarin's flight after he landed, because they didn't want the embarrassment if something happened. Well, we kind of found out that maybe wasn't a good idea to let the press into our voice loops, because there was after we got into orbit, there was a report that there is a large object flying in formation with the Gemini rocket and spacecraft combination. And so, of course, the news media said, you know, tell us about the flying saucers, or saucer. Well, it turned out that it was actually the engine bell off the second stage that had broken loose. We were flying on a Titan II, and they had a history of that. So here it was when it shuts down, the engine busts off. This big bell, it's a thin sheet of titanium, but it's huge, like 12-foot diameter at the nozzle. It was in space, and the radars picked it up. And then we started scratching around and found out that, unbeknownst to us, the military, but it really turned out it was the CIA, had a secret radar facility up on the East Coast that could not only see an object in space with the radar, but could tell the shape. So they told us, hey, it's something that's triangular shaped, but when it turns around, it's circular, you know, it's got to be edge and bell. It's about 12 feet in diameter or whatever. Now, those two bits of information were highly classified. The fact that we owned and operated a radar that could tell what was up in space in 1962 is unbelievable. And the other thing is that the Titan II was in the intercontinental ballistic missile arsenal of the U.S. and to admit to the public or to the world that the engine just fell off the dumb thing, that's supposed to be our deterrent. So they planned, so this was a government cover-up of a UFO, right?
Right.
But it wasn't because we didn't want the American public to know about UFOs and they would panic and run terrified in the streets. We didn't want the Soviet Union to know. The moon hoax, I just came from Stuart Robbins' lecture in the next room where he was talking about all the photography and everything. It kind of disclaims that. But my special thing was I had the responsibility of figuring out how much fuel it took to land on the moon. There was a big concern on how much it would take and running out. Worst thing you can do is you're on your way down and the engine stops. You're going to crash. The first flight, Neil Armstrong's landing, Apollo 11, there was less fuel measured by the low-level sensor. When the low-level light came on, it came on way too early. So we thought, when we went back and checked all our numbers and everything, we thought, you know, something's got to be wrong here. We never could figure it out. Well, when Apollo 12 landed, the same thing. So then we got to really starting to figure it out. And what it turned out, it was a sloshing in the fuel tank. I'm sure in your car, if your tank, if gas sloshes in the tank, it's going to start indicating the wrong stuff. It was very difficult to figure out exactly what was happening there because you can't do a 1/5 gravity simulation on the Earth. You got to be almost in a free-falling elevator or on an airplane. But Langley Research Center did some tests that indicated that because of the low gravity environment that you're in, the sloshing is really exaggerated. And consequently, they put in the right kind of baffles. There were anti-swirl baffles, but there weren't anti-slosh baffles. They just didn't think it was needed. So anyway, my contention is those hoax people have to be pretty damn smart to have thought of something like that, sent the telemetry to us that showed that there was less fuel in the tanks. Apparently, you know, it just seems crazy that that's all simulated. Now, I've got a theory about the moon hoax, and that theory is sort of like, 5 minutes, okay. Let me go. Let me talk real quickly about homeopathy. It's a little longer than I think, but anyway, my wife a couple years ago had real bad problems with vertigo. And she asked me to go pick up something that's called Coccolus indigus. And I got it for her, I think it was through a health food store. You know, I wasn't really paying much attention. And then she asked me to go on the internet and find out what kind of medicine reacts with it. And it turns out Coccolus indigus is a very deadly poison. It's used by the South American Indian tribes. They grind it up, they throw it in a pond or a stream, kills all the fish. So it's, you know, easy fishing. Well, then I started doing further and I found out this is homeopathy stuff. Now, I had some big arguments with her and her friend who claimed this stuff really works. I said, it's homeopathy. There's nothing. It's sugar pills. Oh, no, no. The major part of the contention is my wife was born and raised in Germany, came over to this country when she was in her 20s. So she still thinks that everything in Europe is #1, first class, and everything in the U.S. is crap. So she would say, hey, this stuff comes from France, and France is a wonderful European country. They would never sell something that isn't working. Until I went on the internet and I found out that the European Union allows homeopathic medicines or potions to be sold without any proof of efficacy. Because it doesn't have to be proven. You can sell sugar pills and say it cures anything. So anyway, it's a much longer story than that, but we've had some heated arguments. But when I showed her that the European Union doesn't care that anything. Anyway, oh, I'm sorry. Outreach. This past spring, I gave a talk to a senior citizens group at the Pueblo Community College, Fremont campus, on strange mysteries. Oak Island Money Pit, Roswell flying saucers, so forth and so on. And what I was trying to instill was there's such things as confirmation bias. There's something like Occam's razor that says the simplest explanation is probably the most reasonable explanation. And I gave a talk to about this size group. It was actually there was enough seats for people to sit out. Now, I bet probably none of them really bought what I'm saying. If they believed there was little green men emerged out of Roswell, I'm sure my discussion didn't change one mind. But that's the kind of outreach that I think the skeptical community really should do, is try to expose a wider audience. We're preaching to the choir here, but in essence, you got to get the message out and beyond. Now, am I going to convince anybody that homeopathy or acupuncture, whatever, is, I don't know. Anyway, here's some observations. I'll try to make this fast. I think you got to treat atheism with care, because there's a lot of people that get turned off. You say that you're a skeptic, and they try to hear all that. Had I started off that speech to the talk to the senior citizens, if I said, well, I'm an out-and-out atheist, I'm sure 99% would have walked out with it. It's an enormous turnoff. I think the skeptical message can still get out. I think I've got some other things, but I'm running out of time. I'm really concerned about juries in this country determining sides. And that's one thing that the skeptical community has been silent about. Because it's silent because it's politically incorrect. I think we've got to, the thing with the Archdiocese of LA, similar thing. Population growth. You know that we finally got to 1 billion people on this earth in 1800. It doubled to 2 billion in 1930. It's now what, 7 billion? We have a population that's stressing water, petroleum, and climate. It's not climate change, it's people. And that's politically incorrect to talk about the population explosion. Things like the SkeptiCamp and all these other activities are great on building a community, but I think we need to be proactive on outreach. And that's the end of my 3 charts.
Thank you very much.